Hello and welcome back. We're almost to the deployment of our EC2 instance, but first we need to provide the AMI from which we want to deploy. To do this, we can utilize what's called a data source. A data source is basically just a query of the AWS API to receive information needed to deploy a resource. In this case, we need an AMI ID based on some filters we're going to provide. So let's get started. So if I head over here to my data source documents here for the AWS AMI, you can see an example. Data AWS AMI, and of course, data basically is like the resource keyword we've been using. We're just using data now. AWS AMI is the name of this data source. And of course, this needs to stay the same no matter what. And then this here can be whatever you want to name it. Now we'll be using most recent and we'll be using some filters as well. Now one thing we have to make sure is that we have the correct owner. Now one way to do that is to use AWS Marketplace, but in our case we're going to be a little more specific. Let's take a look at how to get the owner ID we need. So if I head into the management console here, going to type EC2 up at the top, going to open that. And if I go to instances and launch instance, let's take a look. I'm just going to type Ubuntu here, and I'm going to deploy Ubuntu Server 1804. That's one I've used in my other courses, and I'm just going to stick to that for now. 2004 should work perfectly fine, and whatever it is you want, you can choose. But in our case, we're just going to use this 1804. So what I'm going to do is copy this AMI ID because an owner ID is not provided here, which is a little annoying. And then I'm going to head back to my EC2 console, and I'm going to click on AMIs under Images. And right there, make sure you have Public Images chosen, and enter that AMI ID. And here is our owner. So go ahead and copy that. You're going to need it here shortly. All right, so once we have that, let's head back over and start coding this thing out. Let me drop this a little and give it some room. So now what I'm going to do is actually create a new file for this. And we're going to call it datasources.tf. So I'll just create a new file and datasources.tf, just like so. And this will just keep things a little cleaner. So we'll use data, AWS AMI, and we'll just call it our server AMI or whatever you want to call it. We want to specify most recent equals true. And then we provide the owners. Now the owners, as you can see, is plural, so we're actually going to use brackets, which makes it a list. Go ahead and paste that owner ID that we got into here. And of course, if there are other owners, you could, but in this case, we just need that owner ID. All right, now that we have provided our owners here, let's go ahead and provide a filter to get the correct AMI. So if I type filter, just like so, name equals, and we're going to filter on name. I know this looks a little confusing, but the filter name is actually name. And then values equals, and once again, this is plural, so make sure it's in brackets, Ubuntu/images/hvm-ssd/Ubuntu Bionic-18.04-AMD 64, make sure you have the right architecture there, -server, and then what we're going to do, since there's usually a date here, and we're just going to pull the most recent no matter what, we're just going to add an asterisk. So instead of the date that we would use here, we use an asterisk so that any date will qualify. So if I just head right back over here and take a look, you can see basically all we're doing is just putting an asterisk instead of this date, but everything else is exactly the same. All right, so perfect. So that's actually all we need to do. Go ahead and save this file. And then let's go ahead and run a Terraform apply. Terraform apply, auto, approve, just like so. All right, great. So now that is applied. So if I open my terraform.tf state right here, again, you would usually use a Terraform show, but this is a little bit easier for this. We can scroll down under resources. And you can actually see we have instances. Even though we don't have any EC2 instances actually deployed, there's still an instances section that contains this AMI data source. And if you look down, you can actually see we've got an image ID right here, which actually does not match here, and there's a reason for that. And that is, if you look at the date 2021 11/29, the date of this one is actually 2022 01/04. So this is actually a newer instance than what is in the console, which is why that AMI doesn't match. And for our purposes, that's perfectly fine. So we now have an AMI ID that we can reference whenever we create our EC2 instance. So go ahead and mark this lesson complete. Come on back to the next one and let's continue the course.